Ever feel like your photos are just kind of missing something, like they're, technically fine, but they don't quite capture that magic you see in your head, that feeling of, wow, I wish I took that.
Yeah.
Well, you sent us this awesome 20-page guide on photography and visual storytelling. And it's basically like the cheat code to unlock that power. We're going to break down the key insights, those aha moments that'll have you thinking, why didn't I know this before? I'm Terry, and I'm all about that light bulb moment when a concept finally clicks.
And I'm Sheri, here to connect the dots and show you how those seemingly small choices can make a huge difference in your photos.
All right, let's jump right in. This guide wastes no time and gets straight to the heart of the matter.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the gear or the technical stuff. It's about something way more powerful.
What's fascinating here is that the guide emphasizes photography as a form of communication. It's about conveying stories, emotions, ideas, using visuals to connect with your audience on a deeper level.
Okay, so it's like anyone can point a camera and click, right?
Yeah.
But what separates a snapshot from a truly captivating image?
It's about intentionality. It's about thinking, what am I trying to say with this image? What feeling do I want to evoke in the viewer? And then using the tools of photography to bring that vision to life.
So it's less about just documenting what's in front of you and more about crafting an experience for the person who's going to look at your photo.
Exactly. And the guide makes a great point about why this matters now more than ever. We're bombarded with visuals constantly, scrolling through social media, flipping through magazines. But a truly powerful image, one that tells a story, cuts through all that noise, and makes people stop and feel something.
It's like a stunning landscape photo might make you feel a sense of awe and wonder. Or a portrait can capture a person's essence in a way words just can't.
Precisely. And that's why visual storytelling is such a valuable skill, not just for professional photographers, but for anyone who wants to communicate more effectively through images.
Now I know what you're thinking. Okay, cool concept, but where do I even start? And that's where the guide's advice on gear comes in. It covers everything from smartphones to those fancy DSLRs. But it emphasizes a point that's super liberating. Start with what you have.
The guide acknowledges that gear can be overwhelming, especially for beginners. There's always something new and shiny coming out. But the most important tool is your vision, your ability to see the story you want to tell.
So don't get bogged down thinking you need to spend a fortune on the latest camera. Your phone or that old point and shoot can be amazing tools for learning the fundamentals.
And the guide does a great job of breaking down the basic gear essentials without getting too technical. It talks about different lens types, wide angle, standard, telephoto, and how each one can be used to create a different effect.
For example, a wide-angle lens is perfect for capturing those sweeping landscapes or big group shots, while a telephoto lens lets you zoom in on details and isolate your subject. And speaking of lenses, I remember when I first got a telephoto.
Oh, tell me.
I was shooting everything with it. Birds in the backyard, close-ups of flowers, even portraits of my cat looking all dramatic. It was like discovering a whole new world of possibilities. But the point is, you don't need a whole bag of lenses right away. Start with one that fits your style and the kind of photos you want to take.
And as you experiment, you'll start to understand how different focal lengths affect perspective and how you can use that to your advantage in storytelling.
All right, so we've got our gear figured out. Now let's dive into one of the most fundamental aspects of photography, exposure. This is where things can get a little technical. But the guide breaks down the exposure triangle, aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, in a way that even I could understand.
And you know it's great. It doesn't just throw jargon at you. It uses an analogy that makes the clear, the kitchen sink.
I love a good analogy. All right, so imagine your camera sensor is like a sink, and light coming in is like the water.
The aperture is like the faucet, controlling how much water or light flows in. A wide aperture or a wide open faucet lets in a lot of light, while a narrow aperture restricts the flow, like turning the faucet down.
Then we have the shutter speed, which acts like the drain. It controls how long the water or light stays in the sink before draining out. A fast shutter speed is like a drain that opens quickly, letting in less light, while a slow shutter speed lets the light linger a bit longer.
And finally, ISO is like the water pressure. If you need more water or light, you can increase the pressure, or ISO to make your sink fill up faster.
Okay, I gotta admit that analogy really makes it click.
Yeah.
So by adjusting these three elements, aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, we can control how much light hits our sensor and create a properly exposed image.
And what's so cool is that understanding this triangle gives you so much creative control. Want a blurry background to make your subject pop? Play with your aperture. Want to capture motion blur or freeze action? Experiment with your shutter speed.
And if you're shooting in low light, understanding ISO can be a lifesaver.
The guide also addresses common exposure challenges, like those grainy images you sometimes get in low light, or photos that are too bright and washed out. It gives you practical tips for overcoming those obstacles so you can nail the exposure every time.
Speaking of light, and we were, in a way, the guide dedicates a whole section to understanding its qualities and how it can be used to shape your images. It's like light is the secret ingredient that can make or break a photo.
Absolutely. It dives into the different types of light, soft versus hard, and how the direction of light, front, side, back, can drastically impact the mood and feel of your photos.
Like soft light is generally more flattering for portraits because it creates those gentle shadows.
Yeah.
While hard light can be really dramatic and emphasize textures. I'm thinking like a black and white photo of a weathered face with that strong side light.
Oh yeah, that classic, almost cinematic look. And then there's backlighting, which can create these beautiful silhouettes or halos of light around your subject.
Thinking about how light plays on a subject, it almost turns into a game, doesn't it? You start to see it everywhere.
Exactly. And the guide even gives you tips for dealing with tricky lighting situations, like shooting in the harsh midday sun or finding ways to make dull indoor scenes more interesting. It's all about understanding how light works and using it to your advantage.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground already. We've talked about the essence of photography, understanding gear without getting overwhelmed, mastering exposure, and harnessing the power of light. But there's still so much more to explore.
There is. And in the next part of our deep dive, we'll move beyond the technical and delve into the art of composition. How to arrange the elements within your frame to create visually stunning and engaging images.
We'll be right back after a quick message. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Like, subscribe, comment. Welcome back to our deep dive. Before the break, we were talking about how light can totally transform your photos. And now we're going to shift gears, no pun intended, to talk about composition. Because even if you've got the perfect lighting, if your composition is off, your photo might not have that oomph you're looking for. And this guide has some fantastic tips to help us nail it.
It really emphasizes that composition is about so much more than just what you include in the frame. It's about how you arrange those elements to guide the viewer's eye, create a sense of balance and harmony, or even deliberately disrupt that harmony for a more dynamic effect.
So it's almost like a visual language.
Yeah,
Using elements like lines, shapes, and negative space to tell a story.
exactly. And one of the classic composition techniques the guide talked about is the rule of thirds. You know that idea of dividing your frame into 9 equal parts, kind of like a tic-tac-toe board?
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that one. But to be honest, I always thought it was a bit basic.
I get it. It can seem a bit simplistic, but it's a fundamental principle for a reason. By placing your subject or key elements off-center at those intersection points, you create a more dynamic and visually pleasing composition. It's like our eyes are naturally drawn to those points, so it feels more balanced.
Okay, so it's not just about following a rule blindly, but understanding why it works. And then you can break the rule when you want to make a specific statement.
Exactly. The guide also talks about using leading lines to draw the viewer's eye through the image. Think about things like roads, fences, even the lines of a building. All these can create a sense of depth and lead the viewer toward your subject.
It's like those scenes in movies where you follow a character's gaze into the distance. Leading lines can do that in a photo.
Totally. And another technique I love is framing. Using natural elements like doorways, archways, even branches to create a frame within your frame.
I've seen that done really effectively, especially in travel photos. Like you peek through a window and see this whole scene unfolding. So it's like you're inviting the viewer to step into that moment with you.
It's all about creating layers and adding visual interest to your photo. Speaking of layers, the guide also talks about how incorporating elements in the foreground, midground, and background can make your image more dynamic and create a sense of depth.
It's like instead of just having a flat image, you're building a three-dimensional world that the viewer can explore. You're giving context to the scene, making it feel more real.
And the guide gives some great examples of how to achieve this, like shooting through foliage to frame a distant landscape, or incorporating leading lines that connect the foreground to the background. It's all about those thoughtful little details that elevate your composition.
Now, this is where I always struggle. Avoiding clutter in my photos. I tend to get excited and want to capture everything in the scene, but the guide actually addresses that directly, doesn't it?
It does. It talks about how too much clutter can distract the viewer and make it hard to focus on the main subject. It encourages us to be selective, to really think about what's essential to the story we're trying to tell, and to eliminate anything that doesn't contribute.
So it's almost like a minimalist approach to composition. Less is more.
Exactly. It's about simplifying the scene and letting the key elements shine through. And sometimes that means getting closer to your subject, filling the frame, and eliminating any distractions.
I've also noticed that I often just instinctively center my subject. That's like the most obvious choice. But the guide suggests breaking free from that habit, right?
It does. It reminds us that centering the subject can sometimes create a static and predictable composition. Experimenting with off-center placement, using the rule of thirds as a guide, can often create a more dynamic and visually interesting image.
So thinking back to those leading lines, framing and layering techniques, it all comes down to playing with these elements to guide the viewer's eye and create a sense of balance or deliberate imbalance depending on the feeling you want to convey.
And that's what's so cool about composition. It's a powerful tool for shaping the viewer's experience and adding another layer of meaning to your photos.
And speaking of shaping the viewer's experience, let's talk about perspective.
Ah, yes, perspective. This is where we really start to play with how the viewer perceives the scene, right? It's not just about what's in the frame, but how we see it. The guide really drives this point home by encouraging us to break free from the typical eye-level shot and experiment with different viewpoints. Think about getting high up, getting down low, even tilting the camera for a more dynamic feel.
So instead of just standing there and snapping a photo, we're thinking about how we can move around our subject, find interesting angles that might reveal something new or unexpected.
Exactly. Like imagine you're photographing a child. Getting down to their level gives you a whole new perspective. You're seeing the world through their eyes. Or shooting from above can create a sense of vulnerability or emphasize the vastness of a landscape.
It's like with a simple change in perspective, you can make a subject seem larger than life or shrink it down to emphasize its surroundings. And focal length plays a big role in that too, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The guide explains how focal length, the choice of lens you use, can drastically impact perspective. A wide-angle lens can exaggerate distances, drawing the viewer into the scene, while a telephoto lens compresses space, making elements appear closer together.
So if you want to make a landscape seem even more vast and epic, you might reach for that wide-angle lens. But if you want to isolate a subject and create a more intimate feeling, a telephoto could be the way to go.
And what's so fascinating is that the guide also talks about how perspective can influence the perceived power dynamics in a photo. Like if you're photographing a CEO, a low angle might emphasize their authority, while a high angle could make them appear more approachable.
It's amazing how a simple shift in angle can completely change the story you're telling. And speaking of stories, I think it's time we finally dive into the heart of it all. Visual storytelling itself.
Let's do it. This is where the guide really shines, encouraging you to think beyond the technical aspects and tap into your creative vision. It prompts you to ask yourself, what story do I want to tell?
And I love how it breaks down the elements of a visual story, almost like a filmmaker would. We're talking setting, character, mood, conflict, or tension, and even resolution. It's like suddenly we're not just taking photos, we're creating narratives.
And to illustrate this, the guide uses a great example that really resonated with me. A photo of a child with an ice cream cone at a fair.
Oh yeah, I remember that one. What I loved about it was how it captured so much emotion in a single frame. You can almost feel the anticipation and joy of that moment.
Exactly. And if we analyze it from a storytelling perspective, we can see all those elements at play. The setting, the bustling fairground full of color and excitement, the character, the wide-eyed child, clearly the protagonist of this mini-story, the mood, pure delight, anticipation, maybe even a little bit of mischief.
And you can almost imagine the conflict or tension. Will the ice cream melt before they get to eat it? Will they drop it? Will they share with their sibling? And then the resolution, that first blissful bite, the sticky fingers, the pure satisfaction.
It's all there captured in a single, well-composed image. And that's the power of visual storytelling. It's about conveying all those layers of meaning without using a single word.
Now I'm already starting to feel like I'm thinking about photography in a whole new way. But hold on, because we're about to add another layer to our storytelling toolbox. Color and light.
Yes. This is where things get really interesting because color and light aren't just aesthetic choices. They're powerful tools for evoking emotions and setting the tone for your story. The guide even delves into color psychology, the idea that different colors can evoke different feelings.
Like warm colors, like reds and oranges, often convey energy, passion, or even danger, while cool colors like blues and greens create a sense of calm or tranquility.
And then there's color contrast, which can be used to draw attention to certain elements in your photo, or create a sense of visual harmony or tension. Like a bright red object against a dark blue background is going to really pop.
It's like that classic scene in Schindler's List, where the little girl in the red coat stands out against the black and white backdrop. So powerful.
And speaking of powerful, the guide also talks about a technique called chiaroscuro, which uses strong contrast between light and dark to create a dramatic and evocative mood. Think of those Renaissance paintings with those deep shadows and pools of light.
Oh yeah, like Caravaggio. Those paintings are so intense.
Yeah.
How do we translate that to photography?
It's all about understanding how to control and manipulate light. Using side lighting can create those dramatic shadows and highlights, while backlighting can create halos of light around your subject, or even those silhouetted figures.
Okay, so we're basically becoming painters with light. Pretty cool.
And when we combine those lighting techniques with our understanding of color, we have a whole new set of tools for adding emotion and depth to our visual stories.
So suddenly we're not just taking pictures, we're creating art. But before we get too carried away with our newfound artistic powers, let's talk about something that's crucial for any photographer who wants to capture the human experience: authentic emotion.
Yes. The guide emphasizes that photographing people is about so much more than just getting them to smile and say cheese. It's about observing their expressions, their body language, their interactions, and capturing those genuine moments that reveal their true character.
It's like a fleeting glance, a furrowed brow, a genuine laugh. Those are the moments that make your photos come alive. They tell a story that goes beyond posed perfection.
And the guide discusses the pros and cons of candid versus posed shots. Candid shots often feel more natural and spontaneous, while posed shots give you more control over the composition and lighting. It's all about finding a balance that works for you and your subject.
I've always loved candid shots because you capture people in their element unguarded. But sometimes a pose shot can be really powerful, especially if you're working with a model or want to create a specific mood.
And the guide even offers some helpful tips for getting your subjects to relax and be themselves in front of the camera, engaging them in conversation, playing music, giving them a simple task to focus on. All these can help break the ice and create a more comfortable atmosphere.
It's almost like you're a director, guiding your subject, but also giving them the space to be themselves.
Exactly. And when you can capture that genuine connection, it shows in the photo.
Now, shifting gears a bit, the guide also addresses the importance of sensitivity and respect when photographing places and cultures different from your own.
It's a crucial point. It's about being a responsible storyteller, avoiding stereotypes, and representing the diversity of human experience with authenticity and respect.
So it's not just about getting the pretty picture, but about understanding the context, the culture, the stories behind the places and people you're photographing.
And the guide talks about the power of using establishing shots to set the scene, those wide-angle views that capture the essence of a place, and then moving closer to reveal details and create a narrative arc.
It's like building a story layer by layer, starting with the big picture and then zooming in on the smaller moments that bring it to life. I love the example it gives of photographing a street market. You start with that wide shot of the bustling scene, then move in to capture the expressions of the vendors, and finally focus on the intricate details of the products, the exchange of currency, the hands that tell their own stories.
It's about creating a multidimensional experience for the viewer, taking them on a visual journey that reveals the soul of a place.
Now, we've talked about a lot of things that can go right in photography, but let's be real. Even the most experienced photographers encounter technical challenges from time to time. And that's where the guide's troubleshooting section comes in handy.
It's a lifesaver. It addresses common issues like those pesky focus problems that can ruin a shot, white balance confusion that can make your colors look all wonky, and those dreaded grainy images that pop up when you're shooting in low light.
Yeah, I've definitely done there. And what I love is that the guide provides clear, concise solutions that you can actually implement right away to improve your photos.
And it goes beyond just fixing technical issues. It also gives you tips for handling those tricky lighting situations that can sometimes leave you scratching your head. Like, what do you do when you're faced with a high contrast scene, where you have both bright highlights and deep shadows? Or how do you shoot at night when there's barely any light?
I remember one time I was trying to photograph the Milky Way, and I was so frustrated because my photos kept coming out blurry. But then I read a tip about using a longer shutter speed and a tripod to capture those faint stars. and it totally changed the game.
It's like having a photography guru by your side whispering secrets for overcoming any obstacle that comes your way.
Speaking of gurus, I'm curious about this whole developing your own style thing. The guy talks about how style evolves over time through practice, experimentation, and inspiration. But is there something more to it than that?
It's a great question. And the guide does encourage you to study the work of photographers you admire, paying attention to their use of composition, light, and subject matter. It's like, what draws you to their work? What makes their style unique?
I've definitely found myself drawn to certain photographers for their use of color or their ability to capture a specific mood or emotion. But the guide also stresses the importance of finding your own voice, right?
Absolutely. It's not about copying someone else's style, but figuring out what you want to say with your photography, how you see the world. And it reassures you that it's okay for your style to change and evolve as you grow as a photographer.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Exactly. Now we can't talk about photography without at least mentioning the magic of post-processing. The guide provides a brief overview of why editing can be such a valuable tool for enhancing your images and taking them to the next level.
Almost like that final polish, right? You've got the raw materials from the shoot, and now you're refining them, adding your personal touch.
Exactly. And the guide talks about popular software like Lightroom and Photoshop, as well as mobile apps like Snapseed and VS Code that can help you adjust exposure, contrast, color, and sharpness to create the look you envision.
I've been using Lightroom for a while, and it's amazing how much you can do with it. You could take a decent photo and turn it into something really special, but I've also seen people go overboard with the editing and make their photos look, well, not so great.
It's a fine line. And the guide acknowledges that. It emphasizes the importance of using editing tools thoughtfully to enhance your photos, not to completely alter reality.
It's like you want to stay true to the spirit of the moment you captured, but maybe you want to tweak the colors a bit or bring out some details in the shadows.
And the guide even outlines a basic workflow for editing your photos, from cropping and straightening to fine-tuning colors and sharpening details. It's a great starting point for anyone new to editing or looking to streamline their workflow.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive. We've explored perspective, storytelling, the power of color and light, capturing authentic emotion, and even touched on the world of post-processing. But the journey doesn't end there, does it?
It definitely doesn't. In the final part of our deep dive, we'll talk about how to take your photography to the next level, from upgrading your gear and experimenting with new techniques to building confidence and sharing your work with the world.
Stay tuned. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Like, subscribe, comment. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive. We've journeyed through the essentials of photography, from understanding the soul of the craft to mastering light, composition, and capturing authentic emotions. Now it's time to elevate your game and explore how to really take your photography to the next level.
I'm excited to dive into this because I think a lot of us reach a point where we feel like we've hit a plateau. We're comfortable with the basics, but we're craving more right.
And the guide acknowledges that sometimes that plateau can be a sign that it's time to consider upgrading our gear.
It's not about always chasing the newest, shiniest gadgets, but recognizing when our equipment might be holding us back creatively. Like if you're constantly frustrated by low-light performance or wishing you had a wider range of lenses to experiment with, those could be signs that an upgrade might be beneficial.
And I remember when I upgraded from a basic kit lens to a prime lens with a wider aperture, it was like a whole new world opened up. Suddenly I could shoot in lower light.
Yeah.
And create those beautiful blurry backgrounds that make your subject pop.
It's amazing how a new piece of gear can spark so much creativity. And the guide doesn't just leave you hanging with the suggestion to upgrade. It actually provides some helpful advice on essential accessories that can elevate your work, like tripods for stability, external flashes or reflectors for controlling light, and filters for enhancing landscapes or achieving special effects.
And a good tripod is a game changer, especially for landscape photography, or any situation where you need that rock-solid stability. I remember when I finally invested in a decent tripod, no more blurry night shots.
It's those little investments that can make a big difference in the long run. But even with the best gear in the world, it all comes down to practice and experimentation. That's where the real growth happens. And thankfully, this guide is packed with inspiring project ideas that can help you break out of a creative rut and push your boundaries.
I love that it suggests things like the classic 365 challenge, where you commit to taking a photo every day for a year. It sounds daunting, but I can imagine how it would force you to see the world differently, to find those little moments of beauty in the everyday.
It's like a visual diary of your year documenting your growth as a photographer. The guide also mentions themed projects, where you focus on a specific subject, color, or concept for a set period. It's a great way to dive deep into a particular area of interest and really refine your skills.
Like you could do a month of black and white photography, or focus on capturing textures, or even do a portrait series of people in your community. The possibilities are endless.
And for those who love a good narrative, the guide suggests creating storytelling series, where you capture a sequence of images that follow a beginning, middle, and end. It's like creating a visual novel with your camera.
That's a brilliant idea. You could tell the story of a local artisan, or document the transformation of a neighborhood, or even create a fictional narrative using photography as your medium.
And what's so great about these project ideas is that they encourage you to step outside of your comfort zone, to experiment with new techniques, and to see the world with fresh eyes. And the guide also reminds us that making mistakes is an essential part of the learning process. It encourages us to review our images critically, identify what worked and what didn't, and use those insights to improve our future work.
I think that's so important, because it's easy to get attached to our photos, especially the ones we're really proud of. But it's those mistakes, those less successful shots, they often teach us the most valuable lessons.
They show us what to avoid, what to refine, and how to push ourselves further. Every mistake is an opportunity to learn and grow as a photographer.
And speaking of growth, the guide offers some valuable advice on building confidence in your abilities, which I think is something a lot of photographers struggle with, myself included.
It's so true. It's easy to get caught up in comparing ourselves to others, especially in the age of social media. But the guide encourages us to embrace constructive criticism, whether it's from fellow photographers, online communities, or even friends and family. It's all about getting different perspectives and using that feedback to refine our vision.
I know it can be tough to put yourself out there, to share your work and open yourself up to critique, but I've found that the most valuable feedback often comes from people who aren't afraid to be honest with you, even if it stings a little.
And the guide reminds us that it's all about growth, not about seeking validation or perfection. It also suggests keeping a photo journal to track our progress, note down our camera settings and the ideas behind each shot, and celebrate those small wins along the way.
I love that idea of a photo journal. It's like a tangible record of your journey as a photographer,
Yeah.
a place to reflect on your growth, and a source of inspiration when you're feeling stuck. And celebrating those small wins is so important because it's easy to get bogged down in the pursuit of mastery and forget to appreciate how far we've come.
It's those little victories that keep us motivated and remind us why we fell in love with photography in the first place. Now, once you've honed your skills and created a body of work you're proud of, it's time to think about sharing your visual stories with the world.
This is where things get really exciting because photography is all about communication, about connecting with an audience. And the guide gives some great advice on creating a portfolio that showcases your best work, selecting images that represent your style and strengths, and presenting them in a cohesive and compelling way.
It's like curating an exhibition of your visual voice, inviting others to step into your world and experience your unique perspective.
And of course, we live in a digital age. So the guide also talks about the power of online platforms like Instagram, Flickr, and personal websites for reaching a global audience. It's amazing how you can connect with people from all over the world who share your passion for photography.
It's a wonderful community to be a part of, and the guide encourages us to use relevant tags, write engaging captions that provide context and insight into our work, and interact with viewers to build a community around our photography.
It's all about creating a dialogue, sharing not just the final images, but also the stories and inspirations behind them, and for those who appreciate the tangible beauty of a printed image. The guide also suggests exploring the world of physical prints and exhibitions.
There's something magical about seeing your photos come to life in a gallery setting, or even just framed on your own wall. It adds a whole new dimension to the experience, both for you as the photographer and for those who view your work.
It's like taking those pixels and giving them physical form, turning them into something you can touch and feel.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive, the guide leaves us with a powerful reminder that photography and visual storytelling are lifelong pursuits. It encourages us to never stop learning, experimenting, and seeking inspiration from the world around us, whether it's through workshops, online courses, mentorships, or simply observing the work of others.
I think that's a beautiful message to end on. It's a reminder that photography is a journey of constant exploration and discovery, There's always something new to learn and a new technique to master, a new perspective to embrace.
And most importantly, the guide reminds us to approach our photography with passion, authenticity, and a desire to connect with our audience on a deeper level.
So there you have it. We've explored a wealth of information from this incredible 20-page guide, covering everything from the technical fundamentals to the art of visual storytelling, and even some tips for taking your photography to the next level.
We hope you found it as insightful and inspiring as we have. And remember, the best camera is the one you have with you. So get out there, start shooting, and tell your stories.
If you want to dive deeper into the full 20-page guide, you can download it on Patreon. And be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below telling us what resonated with you most from this episode. Until next time, happy shooting. Thanks for being a listener. Click the card above to explore our playlist and find more episodes. And hey, if you really appreciate our work and want to help us keep creating awesome content, you can find us on Patreon. That's patreon.com/McAllister. Or if you just want to buy us a coffee, head over to buymecoffee.com/Jamie McAllister. All content, copyright Jamie McAllister.